He only meant to deliver a piano. But when a school bus flipped in the storm, and two terrified twin girls were trapped inside a quiet man with calloused hands and a broken past, became something he never expected a lifeline. What followed wasn't a headline. It wasn't loud. It was something softer, deeper, and far more miraculous. If you believe in second chances, quiet heroes, and the healing power of music, this story is for you. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt journeys just like this. Now let's begin. The storm came earlier than expected. Rain slammed against the windshield of Jack Turner's pickup truck as he turned onto Maplewood Lane, a narrow two-lane road slicing through the sleepy outskirts of Eastwood, Ohio. Wind howled like a train through the bare tree limbs, and hailstones clicked against the roof like frantic fingers. The local radio crackled, static warnings, icy roads, flash freeze school delays, but Jack wasn't listening. His focus was on the road, and on the baby grand piano strapped tightly in the back, wrapped in layers of tarp and faith. Jack glanced at the dashboard clock, 7:12 a.m. The church had ordered the piano months ago, a donation from a grieving widow. Today was the day it was supposed to sing again for Easter rehearsal, no less. Jack, ever the silent deliverer, had promised to get it there before morning practice. Deadlines were his sacred thing. So was music, even if he hadn't played in years. The road curved sharply ahead, and that's when he saw it. A blur of yellow. Screams. The sound an explosion of metal against metal ripped through the storm. Jack's hands jerked the wheel. Tires skidded. The pickup screeched to a halt just off the ditch, narrowly missing the guardrail. His heart pounding, Jack flung open his door and sprinted into the rain. The freezing air sliced into him, but he didn't feel it. Down below in the shallow ravine, a school bus lay on its side, wheels spinning uselessly. A delivery truck had T-boned it at the intersection. Steam hissed from the hood. Shattered glass glistened like salt across the muddy embankment. The cries, sharp, young, terrified, tore through the air. Jack didn't think. He jumped. Sliding down the embankment, he sprinted toward the wreck. A back window had cracked but not shattered. He could see small hands pressing against the glass, children trapped inside. He grabbed a loose tire iron from the mud and smashed the window. "It's okay, I'm here," he shouted, voice hoarse. One at a time, a boy scrambled out, first blood trickling down his cheek. Then two more. Jack helped them climb up the embankment to a safe patch under a tree, yelling for them to stay put. Then he turned back and froze. Two little girls, maybe 10 years old, were huddled near the front, pinned between two seats. One of them had her arms around the other, whispering something he couldn't hear. Their mother, he assumed, was slumped across the aisle, unconscious, head bleeding. Jack's chest tightened. He didn't pause. Climbing in through the rear window, Jack crawled over twisted seats and broken plastic, his boots scraping against metal. "I'm coming," he said, barely above a whisper. "Hang on." One of the girls turned her head. Wide eyes. Blonde curls matted with blood and rain. She didn't scream. She just stared like she couldn't believe he was real. Jack lifted debris metal bars, a torn backpack. The seats creaked ominously. Smoke started rising from the front engine block. No time. He freed the first girl, Sophie, as her backpack tag read, and handed her out through the back window to a passerby who had arrived. Then the second, Grace, trembling silent. Finally, he bent down, cradled the woman in his arms, and pulled her toward the back. As he passed through the twisted aisle, the horn of the bus blared, then stopped. A deep mechanical groan vibrated through the wreckage. Jack looked back. The engine caught fire. "Move!" someone screamed from above. Jack leapt from the window, his legs giving out as he hit the grass, with the mother still in his arms. Moments later, the bus behind him erupted in flame, casting an orange glow into the morning rain. The crowd that had gathered gasped. Someone clapped. Someone cried. But Jack didn't hear any of it. He was already kneeling beside the unconscious woman, checking her pulse, brushing the wet hair from her pale face. The two girls clung together a few feet away, mute, staring. Then slowly they walked over. One placed her tiny hand on Jack's wrist. The other hugged him wordlessly. Jack didn't know their names, didn't know where they lived, or what came next. All he knew was that his hands were shaking and his heart had just started beating in a rhythm he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Later, when the ambulances had come and gone, and the flashing lights had faded into the trees, Jack stood in the rain by his truck. The piano was still in the back, dry untouched, but something inside him had changed. He looked down the road. The wind had quieted. The hail had stopped. The storm had passed. And for the first time in years, Jack Turner, grieving father, solitary craftsman, felt something crack open in his chest. Not pain, not duty, but the first faint notes of a song he thought he'd lost forever. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old tile. Jack stood awkwardly in the corner of the ER hallway, his boots leaving wet prints on the linoleum. His clothes were still damp from the storm, and a streak of dried blood someone else's cut across his forearm. He hadn't noticed it until a nurse handed him a towel and said gently, "Sir, you really should sit down." But he didn't. His eyes were fixed on the double doors at the end of the corridor. Behind them, the woman he had carried from the wreck lay unconscious. The two little girls, Sophie and Grace, he'd learned their names from the EMTs, were in the pediatric unit down the hall, curled up on a cot, holding each other in absolute silence. They hadn't said a word since the accident. Not one. Jack had seen shock before. He remembered the nurses in Cincinnati using that word when his daughter Lily had passed. "It's the shock, Mr. Turner," they said, when he just sat there, not crying, not screaming. Numb. Hollow. But the silence of these two girls felt heavier, like it came from somewhere deeper. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of memory. 2 hours later, a nurse escorted him to the girls' room. Sophie sat up straight when he entered like she expected him. Grace lay beside her, her face buried in her sister's shoulder. The television on the wall played a cartoon, muted colors, flickering across their pale faces. Jack cleared his throat. "Hey there." No answer. He took a few steps forward. "I brought you something." From under his coat, he pulled out a harmonica, a simple, dented old Hohner he kept in the glove compartment. He didn't even know why he'd grabbed it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was hope. He crouched down and held it out. It was my daughter's. She used to play it in the car when she got bored. Drove me nuts. He smiled the kind of smile that tries too hard. But it made her happy. Thought maybe it could help. Sophie stared at him. Not hostile. Not afraid. Just far away. Grace peeked up. Her eyes met his. For a second, something flickered there. Then she looked away again. Jack set the harmonica on the bedside table and stood. "Okay, I'll just leave it here in case." He was about to turn and go when Sophie reached out. Not for him, for the harmonica. She picked it up, looked at it, then placed it in Grace's lap. Jack didn't say another word. But as he left the room, he heard a soft sound behind him. It wasn't music. Not yet. But it was breath. A tiny breath through metal. A beginning. When Eva Reynolds woke up the next morning, she didn't ask where she was. She didn't ask who had saved her. She didn't ask about her children. She just said, "Where's my violin?" The nurse looked startled. I'm sorry." "My violin," Eva repeated, her voice raspy. "Did someone find it?" "It was in the back of the van, in a case with a blue strap. It has had my name stitched on it." The nurse hesitated. "I don't know, ma'am. I'll check." Eva nodded, then closed her eyes again, not to rest, to avoid the world. The pain in her ribs was sharp. The bandages around her head were tight. But those were surface wounds. The real pain, old, sunken, permanent, was somewhere else. Jacob, her late husband, had given her that violin, a surprise for her 30th birthday. She hadn't played it since the fire, since the night he died, trying to save a gig bag full of lyric sheets and a $30 mic stand. After that, music became poison. Every melody a reminder, every chord a confession of what had been lost. She'd told herself it was better to go silent, safer, for her, for the girls. But now even silence felt like a betrayal. That afternoon, a soft knock came at her door. Jack stepped in carrying 2 paper cups of hospital coffee and a folded denim jacket. Eva opened her eyes but said nothing. "I'm Jack Turner," he said, simply setting the coffee down. "You were unconscious when they brought you in. I was the one who got you and the girls out." She stared at him. "You risked your life." Jack scratched his beard uncomfortable, didn't think much about it. A pause. Then, "Thank you." He nodded, looked down at his boots. "I saw the girls," he said. "They're quiet. Real quiet. They haven't spoken not since Jacob." Ava's voice broke slightly. "I thought time would fix it. It hasn't." "Time doesn't fix much," Jack murmured. "Sometimes music does." Ava turned sharply. "Don't." Jack raised his palms. "Sorry." She looked at him. Really looked for the first time. His eyes were tired. Gentle. There was grief there, too. Not new, but alive. "You play?" she asked after a long silence. He nodded. "Piano. Taught myself when I was a kid. Lost my daughter 3 years ago. Stopped playing for a while." "What made you start again?" Jack glanced at her, still figuring that out. That night, in the dim light of the pediatric room, Grace lifted the harmonica to her lips again. This time, a real note came out. Just one. Long. Uncertain. Sophie turned to her sister wide-eyed. Jack watched from the doorway. He didn't say anything, just smiled. In the silence that followed, something had shifted. It wasn't a miracle, but it was the start of one. The next morning dawned cold and bright, as if the storm had never happened. Jack parked his pickup truck in the hospital's side lot, still dusted with salt and dried leaves from the night before. The piano miraculously had survived the whole ordeal, without a scratch, wrapped tight and anchored in the bed, like a witness to everything that had passed. He leaned on the tailgate, sipping lukewarm coffee, his breath forming ghosts in the morning air. It had been a long time since he'd felt needed, not just thanked, not just smiled at. Needed. The girls had started responding to sound, not with words, but with breath, with eyes, with slight movements of their hands when a note played right. And Eva, though guarded, hadn't asked him to leave. That alone was a door cracked open. By mid-afternoon, the hospital was ready to discharge Eva and the girls. Their injuries were superficial. Their trauma was not. A social worker with kind eyes and rehearsed sympathy explained that temporary housing could be arranged through the county, but the wait list was long and shelters were full. Jack didn't plan to speak, but when Sophie pulled at his sleeve as they stood near the elevators, something shifted inside him. She didn't say anything, just looked up, those wide, silent eyes. The same way Lily used to look at him when she was sick, when she didn't have the strength to speak, only the strength to hope. He didn't think. He turned to Eva. "I live out near Timber Lake. Quiet place. 1 story, 3 bedrooms. You and the girls. You're welcome to stay a while, just till you figure things out." Eva blinked. "You don't even know us." Jack shrugged. "Doesn't matter. I've got more space than I use. And it's safe." She hesitated. "I don't take handouts. It's not a handout." Jack's voice was quiet. It's music. You stay long enough, maybe I can learn how to listen again. Maybe the girls can too." That made Eva pause. Then softly she said, "We won't be a burden." "You won't." Timberlake sat still and silver in the early spring light. Jack's cabin stood at the edge of the water, simple weathered, but well kept. The yard stretched down to a small dock where geese often gathered at sunset. An old wooden swing hung from the porch, its ropes frayed but strong. Eva stepped out of the truck, slowly holding Grace's hand, while Sophie wandered a few paces ahead. Jack unloaded their few belongings, a duffel bag, a folded blanket, a faded photo album. The girls looked around without speaking. "House is nothing fancy," Jack said, leading them inside. "Used to belong to my grandfather. I kept it the way he left it mostly. Except for the music room." Eva stopped in the doorway. The room wasn't large, but it was sacred. A polished, upright piano sat against the far wall, its wood warm in the sunlight. Shelves held sheet music, old records a dusty metronome. In the corner, on a velvet-draped stand, was a framed photo of a girl, 10, maybe 11, with chestnut curls and a crooked smile. Jack's voice was different when he spoke again. "She was mine. Lily. Had a way with harmonies. She died 3 years ago." He didn't elaborate. Eva stepped inside holding her silence like a fragile cup. She looked at the piano, then at the photo, then at Jack. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For not hiding the broken parts." Dinner was quiet. Jack made grilled cheese and tomato soup, old recipes from his dad cooking repertoire. The girls ate silently, but fully. Eva picked at her food at first, then finished every bite. Afterward, Jack wiped the counters, while Eva stood on the porch, arms folded, watching the last light disappear behind the lake. He joined her. "They've been through more than kids should ever know," she said, not looking at him. "I know. Grace still doesn't sleep through the night. Sophie pretends she's fine, but she's the one who wakes up crying. I've got earplugs if that helps." Eva smiled despite herself. "You always deflect with humor." Jack looked out across the water. "I used to play lullabies for Lily when the chemo kept her up. Mozart, mostly. Sometimes Billy Joel. Whatever worked. Eventually, she started humming along. That was when I knew we still had time." Eva turned to him. "You loved her deeply." He nodded. "Still do." She was quiet for a moment. "Then I was a violinist once. Toured with a chamber group out of New York. Then Jacob came along, a folk singer with an old guitar and no sense of time. I thought we were magic. What happened? Our apartment caught fire. He ran back in for his songbook, never made it out." Jack didn't speak, just let the wind carry that grief. Eva exhaled. "I haven't touched a bow since." He looked at her then. "You should." She met his gaze. "Why?" "Because some songs are still inside you. And your girls, they need to hear them." That night, Jack lit a fire in the hearth, while the girls lay curled under handmade quilts. Eva wandered into the music room and stood before the piano. She ran her fingers across the keys, not pressing, just feeling the ivory beneath her skin. Jack watched her from the doorway. "You can play," he said softly. Eva turned to him. "Only if you'll join me." He sat beside her. Together they played, not well, not polished, but enough. Enough to awaken something. And as they played, Sophie and Grace peeked in from the hall. No words, just music. And a stranger with a piano who no longer felt like a stranger at all. The first few days passed like whispers. Jack kept to his rhythm early mornings, quiet coffee, a quick fix on the porch swing's creaking joint. He didn't hover. He didn't push. He simply existed like a well-worn chord waiting to be played. The girls slowly adapted to the house. They didn't speak, but they began to move through the rooms like they belonged. Grace often sat by the window, staring out at the lake, her fingers trailing invisible notes in the air. Sophie followed Jack like a shadow, always just far enough to pretend she wasn't. Eva remained guarded. She helped with chores, took the girls on slow walks through the woods, cooked simple dinners with whatever Jack had in his pantry. But she never entered the music room. Until one evening the ghosts called her in. It was nearly dusk. The girls had fallen asleep on the couch, curled beneath the same quilt. Jack had gone to town for groceries. The house was still. Eva wandered into the music room without thinking. The light filtering through the old lace curtains painted soft patterns across the floor. The upright piano stood silently in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the framed photo of Jack's daughter on the nearby shelf. She approached the bookshelf. Her fingers traced the spines of music books, Chopin, Schubert, Bach. But nestled between them was a small green notebook, handwritten. A child's scrawl across the front. Lily's songs for rainy days. Eva opened it gently. Inside were pencil-written lyrics, unevenly spaced, some lines scribbled out and rewritten in bright pink ink. The titles were simple. My Mom Makes Pancakes, The Sky Hums, When It's Blue, and If My Dad Was a Piano. Eva blinked rapidly and closed the notebook. It was too tender, too raw. Then, from behind the curtain near the window, she noticed a shape. She pulled it aside. There, resting gently on a padded stand, was a violin, not hers, but familiar in form and purpose. Dust clung to the strings. The bow lay beside it untouched. Its presence in the room felt both respectful and defiant, like a memory refusing to be buried. Eva stepped closer. For the first time in years, she reached for a violin, not with obligation or fear, but with longing. The weight of it in her hand startled her, heavier than she remembered, or maybe just full of things she'd pushed down too long. She tightened the bow, adjusted the pegs by instinct. The strings were slightly out of tune. Her fingers moved across them with cautious reverence, like touching a scar that still remembered how it formed. Then gently, she drew the bow across the strings. The note came out shaky, not pure, but real. And just like that, the silence cracked. Jack returned 20 minutes later, with grocery bags tucked under his arm. He stepped inside, shook off the cold, and froze. The house was filled with sound, not just sound music. Soft, imperfect, unsteady, but unmistakably alive. He followed it to the music room. Eva stood by the window, her back to him playing. Her eyes were closed, her posture fluid. She wasn't performing. She was remembering. When she finished, she held the bow in the air for a beat longer than needed, then lowered it slowly, like setting down something sacred. Jack didn't applaud. He just stood in the doorway, hands in his coat pockets, listening to the quiet that followed. I used to think if I played again it would mean I'd forgiven the world, Eva said without turning around. Forgiven the fire. The loss. Jacob. Myself. Jack stepped into the room. And now. She let out a breath. Now I think maybe it just means I want to come back to life. Jack nodded. You don't have to say anything, Eva added quickly. I know this doesn't change anything. Jack tilted his head. Doesn't it? Later that night, they sat on the porch, while the wind curled around them like a lullaby. The lake reflected the sliver of a waxing moon. Inside, the girl slept soundly, the kind of sleep that only comes when something has shifted in the air. Jack sipped tea. Eva cradled a blanket around her shoulders. Lily used to ask me what happens after we die, Jack said suddenly. I'd tell her the truth, that I didn't know, but that, maybe, if we leave behind something beautiful, maybe that's how we stay. Eva didn't answer right away. Then I think you're right. She used to say music was like catching lightning in your hands. You couldn't hold it for long, but for a second, It lit up everything. Eva smiled. She sounds like she was magic. She was. A pause. You're bringing some of that light back, you know? Eva said softly. Jack turned to her, surprised. So are you, he replied, as the fire inside the house dwindled to embers and the stars stitched themselves into the night. A quiet truth settled between them, unspoken but present. They weren't here to rescue each other. They were here to remember how to feel again. And maybe to learn how to begin. The rain returned without warning. It started as a whisper on the roof, barely audible over the soft hum of the heater, then grew into a steady rhythm, like fingers tapping gently on the world. Jack didn't mind. He liked rain, always had. It reminded him that not everything had to move fast. Some things just needed to fall and be felt. Inside the cabin, the lights were dim. A fire glowed in the hearth. Dinner time had come and gone, and the house had slipped into that golden hour between evening and night, when everything felt soft around the edges. Jack sat in the music room, leafing through an old hymnal. He wasn't playing tonight. He didn't need to. Earlier, Eva had picked up the violin again twice. Brief, imperfect tunes like steps on a frozen lake, but she hadn't broken through. Not yet. The girls had stayed quiet as always. Sophie clung to Eva's side. Grace seemed lost in thought, her hands always restless, tapping the armrest, twisting the edge of her shirt, tracing invisible lines on the table. Jack had learned to stop trying to understand grief. It had no map, no rules, only rhythms. Later that night, the storm picked up. Lightning split the sky beyond the lake, thunder rolling across the hills like distant applause. Power flickered once, then steadied. The cabin held firm, its old wood groaning like a ship, but never breaking. Jack was in the kitchen rinsing mugs when he heard it, barely a sound. He turned off the faucet. There it was again. Not words, not speech, but humming. Tentative, fragile, rising and falling like someone remembering how to breathe. Jack stepped into the hallway, heart pounding not with fear, but with the sharp ache of impossible hope. He followed the sound. It led him to the girls' room. The door was cracked open. Inside by the window, Grace sat curled on the floor, knees tucked to her chest. In her lap lay the old harmonica Jack had given them in the hospital. But she wasn't playing it. She was humming to it, like the melody was inside her, and the harmonica was just a mirror. Sophie sat across from her, eyes wide, one hand pressed to her chest. Grace's eyes were closed. She swayed, slightly lost in whatever memory the tune had opened. It was the lullaby Jacob used to sing. Jack recognized it. Simple, pure, the kind of melody that lingers long after the lyrics are forgotten. Eva appeared beside him, drawn by the same sound. She didn't speak. Together, they watched. And when Grace stopped, there was no applause, just silence, warm and full. Then softly Jack whispered, "She remembers." Ava's eyes shone. She never forgot. She just couldn't find her way back. The next morning, Grace didn't hum. She didn't speak, but she smiled. And when Jack set the harmonica beside her cereal bowl, she picked it up, held it to her lips, and played a single note. Sophie clapped, not loudly, not childishly, just once. But it was enough. Later that day, Eva stood in the music room holding her violin like it might fly away. "I want to try something," she told Jack. He nodded. She knelt beside Grace and Sophie, who were coloring in silence. "Do you remember the song Daddy used to sing when it rained?" Both girls looked up. Sophie nodded first, then Grace. Eva turned to Jack. "Could you?" Jack didn't ask what she meant. He just sat at the piano and played the opening chords, simple and slow. Eva raised her violin. The first note was low and aching. Then it lifted, rising like dawn behind a mountain. Jack filled the room with chords that wrapped around her sound, steady and sure. Then unexpectedly Grace sang. Not loud, not clear. But she sang. There's a light behind the thunder, even when the sky turns gray. Sophie joined her, and a voice that lives inside me that the silence can't betray. Ava stopped playing. Jack, too. The girls kept singing. Two small voices in harmony. And then for the first time in 3 years, Ava wept without shame. That night, Jack found himself out on the porch again, watching the moon climb slowly over Timber Lake. Ava joined him, a blanket around her shoulders, her face washed and soft. "She hasn't sung since the night Jacob died," she said. Jack didn't reply. He didn't need to. "She used to sing before she spoke," Ava continued. "Even in the crib. I remember thinking, she'll be a singer. She won't need words, just melody." You were right. Ava leaned her head against the porch beam. Why does it feel like every song comes from a scar? Jack looked out at the lake. Because that's where the quiet lives, in the places that used to hurt. Ava turned to him. There was something unspoken in her eyes. Trust. Maybe. Or the first flicker of something deeper. "I'm scared," she said. "So am I. I don't know if I can carry this forever." "You don't have to," Jack said quietly. "You just have to carry it one note at a time." Later, when the house had settled and the girls were fast asleep, Jack sat at the piano staring at the keys. He pressed one, then another, then a chord. Behind him, Eva leaned in the doorway. "Do you ever play for yourself?" she asked. Jack looked over. "Not in a long time. Maybe it's time you remembered how." He didn't answer, but his hand stayed on the keys, and slowly, gently, he played. A new song. Not Lily's. Not Jacob's. Something that belonged to this moment. To now. And as the final note rang out, Eva whispered, "We're starting to sound like a family." Jack didn't say it out loud, but in his chest, the words rang clear. "So do we." The letter arrived folded neatly in Sophie's backpack. Jack found it the next morning as he sorted through the mountain of papers Eva had pulled from the school office, a week's worth of handouts and forms she'd reluctantly agreed to review now that the girls had returned to class part-time. He flipped through lunch calendars and emergency contact forms until he saw it, a printed invitation with bright musical notes across the top and Comic Sans font that made him flinch. Eastwood Elementary Spring Concert, open to student staff and families. He paused. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Sophie's music teacher. We heard about Sophie and Grace's musical talents. Would they consider performing a short song as part of the family showcase? Jack stared at the page for a long moment, then folded it and set it aside. Later that evening, as rain misted against the windows, and the scent of Eva's rosemary chicken lingered in the kitchen, he sat at the table with the girls and Eva, and slid the invitation across the table. Sophie read it first. Her eyes widened. Grace leaned in, curious. Eva read silently. Then she leaned back in her chair. "I'm guessing this is optional." "Completely," Jack said. "But it's an opportunity." Sophie looked at Grace, then at Eva. Grace didn't look at anyone, but her fingers tapped a quiet rhythm on the edge of the table. Eva folded her arms. "It's too soon." Jack nodded. "Maybe. They're just beginning to trust music again." "I know. And if it goes wrong, if they freeze up or someone laughs or... then we hold them tighter afterward," Jack said gently. "That's all." Ava looked away. She wasn't wrong. They were fragile. But so was every beautiful thing worth protecting. 2 days passed. No one mentioned the invitation. Not until Sunday afternoon, when Jack came back from town with groceries and found Sophie and Grace in the music room. They were sitting on the floor, side by side, writing something on a scrap of paper. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. Ava appeared behind him. "They've been working on lyrics," she said, her voice low. "Not anything formal. Just lines. Fragments." Jack smiled. "That's where songs are born. They're thinking about it," Eva added. "About the showcase." He turned to her. "And you?" Eva hesitated. "I'm not ready." Jack's voice softened. "It's not just about being ready." "What is it then?" "It's about being brave anyway." That night, after the girls were asleep, Eva sat at the piano bench beside Jack and laid a piece of folded paper on the music stand. It was the lyrics the girls had written. Simple, raw, hopeful. "We lost our voice, but not our song. We still remember where we belong. We don't need loud to make it right. Just a little courage in the quiet." Jack read it twice, then looked at Eva. "It's good. It's theirs. They'll need you on stage." Ava's hands curled around the edges of the bench. "What if I can't?" "You can." She didn't argue, which meant she was starting to believe it too. A week later, Ava drove the girls to school, with a signed permission slip in her purse and a violin case in the back seat. Jack stayed behind watching from the porch as the truck disappeared down the road, gravel crunching under the wheels. He didn't say it aloud, but for the first time the silence in the house didn't feel empty. It felt full of something waiting. As rehearsals began at the school, the girls came home buzzing with quiet energy. They didn't talk much, but their laughter started returning in bits, especially when Jack played chord roulette, making up the world's worst harmonies and pretending not to notice their giggles. Ava practiced too late at night, when the house had gone still, her bow strokes careful and clean. She didn't try to sound impressive. She tried to sound real. Jack played along, sometimes gently filling in the spaces with simple chords. Once he caught her smiling at him in the candlelight. "You're better than you think," she whispered. He looked at her eyebrows raised. "At piano, or at pretending I'm not terrified?" "Both." They laughed. It was the kind of laugh that carried weight, not from the moment, but from everything that had come before it. 2 days before the showcase, a wrinkle appeared in the plan. Jack was sitting on the porch tuning his old guitar when Eva stepped outside holding her phone. Her face was pale. "What is it?" he asked. "Mrs. Ellsworth," she said. "The music teacher. She wants to change the order of performances. She's thinking about placing us first." Jack winced. "First is bold." She said it might set the tone. Eva sat beside him, tension wrapped tight around her shoulders. "If we go first and we fail, you won't fail." Eva looked at him. He met her gaze. "You'll go first, and you'll light the room up." That night, Jack wrote a few new chords for the girls' lyrics. He didn't tell anyone. But in the quiet of the cabin, while Eva played her scales and the girls practiced in whispers, Jack sat alone with his guitar and wrote the final verse to the song. It was for them, but also for him. Because somewhere along the way, this broken family that wasn't his had become his. The night before the showcase, the house held a nervous energy like a deep breath, drawn and not yet released. Jack could feel it in the walls, in the way the floorboards creaked just a bit more sharply. Sophie and Grace were unusually quiet, tucked beneath their quilt on the couch, staring at the flickering fire, but not really seeing it. Eva moved with precision, like every step, every gesture had to be exactly right, or the balance would tip. Dinner had been simple chicken and rice, but no one ate much. The table conversation was minimal. Jack tried a joke or two, and Sophie offered a tired smile, but even that faded quickly. It was the kind of quiet that didn't ask to be broken. It asked to be understood. After the girls had gone to bed, Ava stood in the music room with her violin adjusting the shoulder rest as Jack tuned the upright piano. He could sense the tightness in her movements. Her bow hand trembled slightly. Her breathing was clipped shallow. "You don't have to be perfect," he said gently. I'm not trying to be perfect, she replied. I'm trying to be enough. For them. You already are. Ava didn't answer. She placed the violin under her chin, drew the bow across the strings, and then it happened. A sharp snap, like a twig underfoot. The bow went limp in her hand. The tension had given out. She stared at it, stunned. Jack froze. No, she whispered. No, no, no! Jack rushed to her side. Let me see it! She handed it over, eyes wide, hands shaking. The hair had torn near the frog. Clean break. Unusable. I'll fix it, Jack said immediately, though he knew he couldn't. Not in time. Ava took a step back, arms crossed, trembling now. Not from cold, but from something older. Panic. I should have known. I should have known this was too good to last. Ava, this is exactly what always happens, she said, voice rising. Every time I think we've made it through, something snaps. Something breaks. And we're right back where we started. It's just a bow. It's never just a bow, she shouted, then caught herself. The house was silent. Upstairs, the girls shifted in their beds. She sank into the bench, burying her face in her hands. Jack crouched beside her. Look at me, he said softly. She did. This isn't a sign. It's just bad luck. I'll go into town first thing in the morning. Someone will have a bow. She shook her head. Not one like this. It's the only one I've played with since Jacob. He gave it to me the night he proposed. He said it would be our first wedding gift. Jack was quiet. Ava laughed bitterly. And I believed him. That love and music would carry us through anything. It did, Jack said. And now it's carrying the girls. And you. And me too. She looked at him, eyes searching his. I can't lose this, she whispered. Not now. You won't. He reached out carefully and took her hand. You're not alone in this anymore. At dawn, Jack left before the others were awake. He drove 2 towns over to a music store he knew from years ago, run by a retired symphony cellist named Harold Boone. The old man opened early, always did. Jack explained the situation in a rush, holding the broken bow in his hand like a lifeline. Harold examined it with a solemn frown. Sentimental damage always hits harder than structural, he muttered. Can you rehair it? Not before noon. I need it before 10. Harold paused. Then he walked into the back room and returned with a case. Inside was a bow, not brand new, but lovingly kept. Pernambuco wood, silver, winding, soft leather grip. Balanced. Responsive. This belonged to my wife, Harold said. She was a violinist, too. She passed last spring. Jack hesitated. I can't take that. You can borrow it. Just bring it back when the music's done. Jack took the bow with reverence, and on the drive home he felt something shift in his chest. Community, kindness, quiet sacrifices, all the things that make miracles possible. When he walked through the cabin door, Ava stood by the fireplace, worry etched across her face. He held up the bow. It's not yours, but it's worthy. She took it like it might break in her hands. Then she laughed, a short, stunned laugh. You found a bow, Jack nodded. You're not the only one who believes in music. That evening, as they prepared for the performance, Eva gathered the girls in the living room. She knelt beside them and held out the bow. This isn't the one Daddy gave me, she said. But that's okay, because what we're doing tomorrow isn't about what we've lost. It's about what we've kept. Grace reached out and touched the bow. Sophie smiled. Eva looked at them both. You're ready, Grace nodded. Sophie whispered, let's light the room up. That night after the girls went to sleep, Eva found Jack sitting on the porch. She sat beside him. For a long time they didn't speak. Then Eva said, You saved us. Jack looked at her. No, you saved yourselves. I just opened the door. She turned toward him. But you stayed. That's the part no one ever does. He met her eyes. Neither of them moved. Then slowly, without fear, Ava leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, not saying goodbye to the past, but saying hello to something new. The school auditorium smelled like freshly mopped tile and pencil shavings. Parents shuffled into rows of plastic chairs, murmuring over folded programs, clutching coats, and coffee in paper cups. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a washed-out glow on the small wooden stage that had been decorated with pastel paper flowers and glittery cardboard cutouts of musical notes. Behind the curtain, the hum of nervous children filled the air, whispers, shoe scuffs, the occasional high-pitched giggle. Teachers darted back and forth with clipboards and clip-on microphones, trying to maintain order without shattering the illusion of celebration. In the wings stood Ava, her violin case at her feet, her hand gently resting on Grace's shoulder. Jack adjusted the microphone stand, while Sophie tapped the side of her shoe against the floor in a slow, steady rhythm. The girls wore matching blue dresses, simple cotton chosen more for comfort than flash. Ava had braided their hair that morning, her fingers trembling with the weight of what today meant. Jack turned to them. "You all right?" Sophie nodded. "I think so." Grace looked up at him. "My heart's doing drums." Jack smiled. "That's how you know it matters." 10 minutes before curtain, a voice crackled over the backstage speaker. "Lane family, you'll be first. Ready to open the show." Eva froze. She had expected to go somewhere in the middle, quietly tucked in. Safe. First meant every eye. First meant no warm-up act. She turned to Jack. Maybe this was a mistake. He met her gaze, calm and steady. "It's not." Her fingers curled tighter around the bow. "They're just little girls. And they're going to show this room what courage looks like." Sophie stepped forward. "We want to do this, Mom." Ava looked down at her daughter, so small and still so brave. She swallowed hard and nodded. The lights dimmed. The auditorium hushed. A spotlight hit center stage. The MC, a cheerful woman from the PTA with bright lipstick and a binder full of announcements, stepped to the microphone. "To open our showcase, we have something truly special. A family who reminds us what music can do not just for the ears, but for the heart." She turned, gesturing toward the wings. "Please welcome the Lane family." They walked out together. Jack on the left, guitar in hand. Ava on the right, violin tucked under her arm. Sophie and Grace in the center holding hands. There was a moment, a half-second of collective stillness as the audience took them in. A few people whispered. A teacher in the front row leaned forward. Jack stepped to the microphone. "We'd like to share a song written by Sophie and Grace. It's about finding your voice again even when you think it's gone, especially then." He nodded. Eva brought her bow to the strings. Jack began to play. The opening chords were soft and simple, 3 minor notes that melted into each other like falling rain. Eva joined with a melody that rose gently, like a breath held too long. Then the girls began to sing. We lost our voice, but not our song. We still remember where we belong. Their voices, quiet but unwavering, floated into the room. There was no backing track, no digital effects, just one guitar, one violin, and 2 children singing with every part of themselves. We don't need loud to make it right. Just a little courage in the quiet. On that last line, Grace hesitated, a beat of silence. Sophie looked at her sister, and instead of filling the gap, she waited. Grace closed her eyes and sang the next verse. Clear. True. The auditorium was still. Even the babies in the back stopped fussing. Time held its breath. When the final note faded, there was no immediate applause, just awe. Then, like a wave rising from the floor, someone stood. It was Mrs. Ellsworth, the music teacher. She had been skeptical, dismissive. But now her hands came together in a slow, deliberate clap. The auditorium followed. Parents, students, teachers, standing, clapping, weeping. Jack looked at the girls. They didn't smile. They beamed. Ava bowed her head, pressing her lips together to keep from sobbing. Jack squeezed her hand. And in that moment, they weren't broken pieces anymore. They were a song. Backstage chaos returned. A dozen parents offered hugs and congratulations. One father with a camcorder asked if he could upload the performance to YouTube. Jack politely nodded, unsure whether to be honored or terrified. Eva stood in the corner, watching the girls accept praise with shy smiles. Jack came to stand beside her. "You were magnificent," he said. "I was a mess," she replied. "Messy is human, and human is brave." Ava turned to him. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting me run." He hesitated. Then gently he said, "I'd follow you anyway." Ava blinked, and for the first time since Jacob, since the fire, since she had sworn off music and love in equal measure, she leaned in, not out of obligation, not out of grief, but something quieter, something warm. And Jack, steady as always, met her halfway. Their lips touched in a kiss that was soft, reverent, like the final note of a song that had waited years to be played. By Monday morning, the video had 342 views. By Tuesday, it passed $1,000. Not exactly viral by modern standards, but something more remarkable was happening in the comments section. Something Jack noticed when he clicked on the YouTube link that Sophie's teacher had emailed with a cheerful subject line. "You lit us up." The comments weren't coming from strangers. They came from neighbors, parents, teachers, choir directors from nearby towns. A mother wrote, "My son hasn't spoken since the accident last year. After watching your girls sing, he asked if he could learn guitar." A retired nurse posted, "I'd forgotten how much music used to matter to me. Thank you for reminding me. It wasn't fame, it was resonance. And resonance, Jack thought, is how real change begins." At the cabin, life returned to its quiet rhythm. The spotlight never found them, and they never chased it. But something had shifted. Grace hummed almost constantly now. Sometimes, she made up songs about clouds or soup, or the way the porch creaked when Jack stepped on the third plank. Sophie started drawing again bright, bold sketches of stages and microphones, of people clapping, and hearts blooming like sunflowers. Ava was different too. Not louder, but more open. She played often now, sometimes with the windows wide, letting her notes drift out across Timber Lake like dandelion seeds. And once, just once, Jack heard her laugh in the middle of a song when she hit a wrong note and decided to keep playing anyway. That laugh lingered in the house long after the music stopped. One crisp Saturday morning, Jack stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee and found a man standing at the gate. He wore a gray windbreaker and held a clipboard, his expression tentative. "Can I help you?" Jack asked, stepping off the porch. "Are you?" "Jack Turner," the man asked. "I am. My name's Peter Carson. I run the youth arts program at the community center in Asheville. We saw the video." Jack nodded cautiously. "Ah." Peter smiled. "We're hosting a spring concert next month. All ages, all levels. We'd like to invite the Lane family to perform." Jack paused. "You'll need to ask Eva." "I will," Peter said, then added, "But between you and me, I think you're part of that family now too." Eva stood at the sink, drying breakfast dishes when Jack told her. She didn't speak right away. Then she said, "I don't want the girls to think they have to perform to be loved." "They don't," Jack said. "But they might love performing." Ava looked out the window where Grace and Sophie were gathering wildflowers under the trees. "I'll ask them," she said quietly. They said yes before she finished the sentence. Grace nodded with unblinking certainty. Sophie jumped and nearly knocked over a glass of milk. Ava laughed. Okay. But this time, you picked the song. The girls spent that week composing. Ava helped with the structure. Jack helped with chords. But the lyrics were entirely their own. We were quiet, but not gone. We were shadows holding on. Then one voice became two more. Now we're stronger than before. It wasn't polished. It was true. The night of the Asheville performance, the community center was packed. Folding chairs filled with grandparents, kids in oversized choir robes, neighbors in Sunday sweaters. Backstage, Eva paced, while Sophie tuned her ukulele, and Grace practiced the opening line under her breath. Jack leaned in the doorway, guitar in hand, watching them all. He didn't feel like the outsider anymore. He felt like the frame that held the picture. The MC introduced them without fanfare. Up next, the Lane family performing an original piece titled Stronger Than Before. They stepped into the spotlight. No glitter, no stage effects. Just 4 people, 1 song. This time, Eva didn't tremble. Sophie started the first line. Grace came in with the second. Eva's violin wrapped around them like sunlight through glass, and Jack, playing rhythm just behind them, smiled at the sound. Not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. After the show, a young girl approached Grace shyly, holding a recorder in her hands. "You're the reason I joined music class," she said. Grace looked stunned. Then she said, "I like your shirt." It was a start. Jack walked with Ava out into the warm spring night. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm more than okay," she said. "I'm here." He looked at her. She looked at him. And they both understood what wasn't being said. The music had done more than heal. It had woven them into something unspoken but real. A family not of blood but of belonging. Back at the cabin long after the girls had fallen asleep, Ava stepped out onto the porch, where Jack was sitting, looking out over the lake. She sat beside him, tucking her feet beneath her. "I used to think quiet was something to fear," she said. "Me too. But I think now, maybe quiet is where the miracle begins." Jack turned to her. "You still afraid?" he asked. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes," he nodded. "Me too." Then she smiled. "But I think we're stronger than before." Jack slipped his arm around her, and in the stillness of the night under a sky littered with quiet stars, they sat together in silence. Not because they had nothing left to say, but because some songs don't need words at all. The applause faded, but the silence it left behind was anything but empty. In the weeks that followed the Asheville performance, life at the cabin took on a gentler rhythm, no less full, but somehow softer at the edges. It was the kind of silence that didn't ache anymore. It warmed. It held. It listened. The girls returned to school full-time, walking hand in hand down the gravel road each morning, their backpacks bouncing and their hair braided with purple ribbons. Grace started writing in a small notebook Jack had given her, pages filled with little songs, sketches, fragments of thoughts that didn't yet need to be complete. Sophie joined the after-school music club and shockingly volunteered to help lead warm-ups. She even made a pun her teacher told Eva at pickup one afternoon, eyes wide with joy. She said she was the sophero of the soprano section. Ava had laughed so hard she nearly cried. Jack found himself stepping into new roles too. He was still the man who fixed old pianos and carried groceries in one hand and a girl's scooter in the other. But now, he also became someone who people waved to when he came to town. Someone who was known not for what he'd lost, but for what he'd helped build. People began bringing him instruments not just for repair, but for stories. A widower dropped off his wife's harp, saying it had been quiet too long. A shy teenager came by with a broken mandolin she'd inherited from her grandfather. Jack didn't always fix them perfectly, but somehow the music returned. One afternoon, Ava found him sanding the body of an old cello on the porch. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. "You ever think about opening a shop?" she asked. Jack looked up, surprised. "What, like Turner and Sons, Turner and Daughters?" she corrected. He chuckled. "I'd need a name that fits." Ava stepped closer. "How about the Quiet Miracle?" Jack stopped, then nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That might just work." Ava had changed, too. She played almost every day now, not just for herself, but for others. She began giving free lessons to a few local kids, setting up folding chairs in the cabin's living room, patient and calm, even when the bow slipped or the string screeched. She wasn't trying to be who she used to be. She was becoming someone else entirely, someone softer, stronger. One evening after a lesson, Grace asked if they could record one of their songs. "Just for us," she said, "so we don't forget how we sound when we're brave." Ava agreed. They set up Jack's old phone on a mason jar, gathered around the piano, and played. No audience, no spotlight. Just 4 people in a sunlit room creating something that didn't need to be shared to be meaningful. Not long after, a letter arrived in the mail. A formal one, addressed to Eva Reynolds and family. It bore the letterhead of the Ohio Music Therapy Association. A woman named Marla Jensen had seen the video of their school performance, forwarded from a cousin who'd seen it through a friend who'd found it in a local Facebook group. She was organizing a weekend retreat for families affected by grief, trauma, and loss. The theme was healing through harmony. She wanted them to come, not to perform, to lead. Ava read the letter 3 times. Then she handed it to Jack. "I'm not sure I'm the kind of person they think I am," she whispered. Jack folded the letter carefully. "Maybe they don't need the person you were." She looked at him. Maybe, he continued, "they need the person you're becoming." Ava was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'll do it. If we do it together." He smiled. Always. The weekend retreat took place at a rustic lodge, nestled between wooded hills, where wildflowers carpeted the forest floor, and the air smelled like pine and damp earth. The girls ran barefoot through the fields, laughing with other children who had learned too early what it meant to say goodbye. Jack and Ava led a session on collaborative songwriting. They started by telling their story, not all the details, just enough to say, "We've been where you are, and we didn't stay there." One family shared a song about missing bedtime stories. Another wrote a lullaby to a lost brother. No one worried about melody or rhyme. They just shared. Ava watched a mother hug her child after singing one hesitant verse and realized for the first time in years that she wasn't afraid of being part of something larger than herself. She wasn't performing. She was connecting. On the final night of the retreat, after the campfire had burned low and the stars scattered across the sky like confetti, Eva and Jack stood together in the field, arms linked. The girls had fallen asleep inside, curled up in sleeping bags beneath a ceiling of glow-in-the-dark stars. Ava looked at Jack. "What happens next?" she asked. Jack looked out at the woods, the sky, the future. "We live," he said. "We keep singing." Back at the cabin, they settled into a new kind of quiet, not the silence of fear or grief, but the pause between verses, the breath before something beautiful. Spring gave way to summer, like a soft hand passing a torch. The trees around Timber Lake grew full and wild. Birds returned to the eaves of the cabin. Lily pads surfaced again on the water, spreading like green promises. The air smelled of grass and old wood ummid by the sun. And for the first time in years, the house by the lake was not quiet. Not the heavy quiet of grief. Not the awkward quiet of strangers, but the joyful kind, the kind filled with small footsteps and humming in the hallway, with Grace's new obsession with spoons as drums, and Sophie's insistence on rewriting old songs with better rhymes. With Eva practicing violin in the early mornings by the open window, and Jack softly playing piano in the evenings as the light turned golden across the water. It was not a house anymore. It was a home. The living room looked different now. What had once been Jack's quiet sanctuary had become a hub of creativity. Sheet music scattered on the coffee table coloring pages, taped to the bookshelf, a whiteboard with the words "Lyrics of the Day" scribbled in purple marker. In one corner stood Eva's violin stand. In another, Jack's rebuilt upright piano. And beside it, a small wooden stool, the perfect height for a child. One evening, Jack came home from town with a box under his arm. He placed it on the table, sat down, and opened the lid. Inside was a ukulele. Sophie gasped. For me, Jack nodded. Thought the soprano of the soprano section ought to have her own instrument. Grace squealed, jumping off the couch. Can I play it? 2. Jack grinned. It's not mine to say. Sophie held it tight like something sacred. We'll share. Eva watched from the kitchen, her heart full. There were still bills to pay, still laundry and tired days, and reminders that the world outside this cabin hadn't changed just because they had. But somehow, none of that felt heavy anymore, because love steady, present love lightened everything. One quiet afternoon, Eva and Jack sat on the dock, legs dangling over the edge toes, skimming the surface of the lake. The girls were picking wildflowers behind them, deep in debate over which colors made the best stage costumes for their next concert, a backyard production planned for an audience of squirrels and one very uninterested raccoon. Eva leaned her head on Jack's shoulder. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been on that road that morning? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, Sometimes, but not for long. Why not? Because I was, he said simply. And you were, and the girls were, and we're here. She nodded. It still hurts, she said. I know. And it still surprises me how much beauty can come after the breaking. Jack took her hand. Maybe the breaking made space for the beauty. The next Sunday they held what Jack jokingly called porch church. It started with Grace asking if they could play something for the trees, and ended with 3 neighbors joining in, bringing lawn chairs, a thermos of sweet tea, and a harmonica that hadn't been touched in years. They played old folk songs, a hymn or two, and a few of the girls' originals. Eva led with her violin eyes closed, bow sure. Jack sat at the piano, playing in that quiet, grounded way of his never stealing attention, just holding the space. Afterward, one of the neighbors pulled Jack aside. You know, he said, there's a kind of peace on this porch. Not the loud kind, the real kind. Jack smiled. It's the music. It's the people the man corrected. That night, after the girls were tucked in and the stars stitched themselves into the sky, Eva stood at the window, looking out at the lake. Jack came up behind her. They're asleep, he asked. Out cold. Sophie dreamed she was in a band called The Quiet Thunder. I'd buy that album. Eva turned to him. Her voice was low, serious. Jack, would you ever think about making this permanent? He didn't pretend not to understand. He didn't deflect with humor. He stepped closer. I already have, he said. She smiled, breath-catching. And that was their answer. No ring yet. No ceremony. Just a promise made in stillness and sealed in song. Months passed. The seasons turned again. But the music never stopped. It played in the laughter that spilled from the kitchen, in the violin warm-ups floating down the hallway, in Grace's latest lyrics, about a raccoon who wanted to be a rock star in Jack's humming as he fixed a splintering fretboard under the porch light. One morning, Sophie woke before dawn and tiptoed into Jack's room. Can I tell you something, she whispered. Jack sat up, rubbing his eyes. Of course. She climbed onto the edge of his bed, knees pulled up to her chest. I don't remember what Dad's voice sounded like anymore. Jack nodded gently. That's okay. But I think she added he would have liked it here. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. I think he would have loved it. Sophie leaned her head against his arm. I'm glad we stayed. Me too, kiddo. On the last page of Grace's songwriting notebook in careful slanted handwriting were the words, "This house used to be quiet." Now it sings. Ava framed it and hung it above the piano. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. And so the house by Timber Lake became more than a shelter. It became a place where silence wasn't feared. It was respected, and then rewritten. One note, one word, one kind act at a time. Sometimes the quietest miracles begin not with a grand gesture, but with a single act of kindness. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Share your city, your state, or even just a few words about how this story made you feel. We read every comment with gratitude. And if you'd like to join us for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the good in the world, feel free to subscribe. There's always a seat for you here. Thank you truly for spending your time with us today. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and stay connected.